Okay, I would like to welcome everyone to today's Rosary Rally in honor of Our Lady of the Rosary to promote Our Lady of Fatima and the message of Fatima. And I'm John Veneri, editor of Catholic Family News. Father Gruner was kind enough to ask me to come and give the first talk of the day. And that talk is called Fatima and the Approach of Midnight. It is godlessness that leads to the Gulag. Those are the words of Alexander Solzhenitsyn in 1983, the great Russian dissident. It is godlessness that leads to the Gulag. Here's what he writes. He says, more than a century ago, while I was still a child, I recall hearing a number of older people offering the following explanation for the great disasters that had befallen Russia. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. He goes on. Since then, I have spent well nigh 50 years working on the history of our revolution. In the process, I have read hundreds of books, collected hundreds of personal testimonies, and have already contributed 8 volumes of my own toward the effort of clearing away the rubble left by that upheaval. But if I were asked today to formulate as concisely as possible the main cause of the ruinous revolution that has swallowed up some 60 million of our people, I could not put it more accurately than to repeat, men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Close quote from Solzhenitsyn. Our Western nations are becoming increasingly godless, increasingly anti-Christ in their laws, in education, cultural institutions, and in our case too, I'm a little more nervous because in our case, it's not so much that men have forgotten God, but it's even worse, modern man is in revolt against God. Non serviam, I will not serve, my kingdom come, my will be done. Now I want to illustrate a little more that godlessness leads to tyranny. We can't really be indifferent about the fact that the nations and our social institutions are more and more godless. In the early days of the Nazi advance in Eastern Europe, there were Nazi extermination squads. They'd be sent out to sweep into villages, and what they would do is they would force villages at gunpoint, at machine gun point, to dig their own graves, and then they would gun them down. And at one point, on one of these occasions, there was a young SS soldier, and he was forcing an old bearded Hasidic Jew to dig his own grave. And at one point, the Jew stood up, pointed to the SS guard and said, God is watching what you are doing. And the SS soldier just went and gunned him down. Machine gunned him dead. The soldier, the product of Nazi atheism, rejected the reality of God. And by doing so, he rejected the reality that God not only created us, but he will reward us for our good actions and will punish us for our evil actions. But if there is no God, really, we are responsible to no one. Who are we responsible to? The word responsible comes from responde, responding to someone. And the modern atheist doesn't respond to anyone but himself. Dostoevsky, you're familiar with Brothers Karamazov. He has Ivan Karamazov say in the novel, if God does not exist, then anything is permissible. Stalin rejected God, so for him, anything was permissible. Hitler rejected God, anything for him was permissible. Lenin rejected God, for him, anything was permissible. Mao Zedong rejected God, so for him, anything was permissible. And that's why we have to be concerned. We have to be nervous. We have to be on guard regarding the fact that our modern governments, whether it be the European Union or Canada or the United States, are becoming more and more atheistic. Because ultimately, atheism ultimately breeds the principle that, as I said, if God does not exist, anything is permissible. What do we end up with? Sheer utilitarianism, sheer pragmatism, whatever works. The end justifies the means, whether it be mass murder or forced euthanasia, or assisted suicide in healthcare programs just to keep the costs down. In the United States already, we're responsible for the murder of millions of unborn babies since the so-called legalization in 1973. Over 3,000 babies killed a day, more than who were killed on 9/11. This is what we're doing every day. This is essentially a godless law. It is an anti-Christ law. We have to do away with falling for the left wing, right wing. No, it's Christ and Antichrist. And these are essentially Antichrist laws. And if you look it up, 1933, Humanist Manifesto, 1974, Humanist Manifesto, they both claim that there is no God. Both these manifestos, they claim a number of things, but also they call for the legalization of abortion as not only good, but necessary for the future of mankind. Now, you're probably aware that atheism is in vogue right now. It is chic. It's what you get at the universities, it's in the media, and we have this whole new group of militant atheists. Richard Dawkins is one of them, from Cambridge, you know, a very stuffy teacher of biology. Dawkins, militant atheist. Christopher Hitchens, militant atheist. Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett. Sam Harris, these are some of these names. Now, Sam Harris, one of these new breed of militant atheists, among other writings, he published an essay entitled, "Science Must Destroy Religion." Well, good luck, Sammy. Good luck. Empirical science cannot destroy religion. Empirical science cannot disprove the existence of God. How is a biologist going to disprove the existence of God? How is a physicist going to make a certain claim, a claim with certitude, that Jesus Christ, when he walked on earth, did not perform the miracles? How is he going to make that? Miracles are above the laws of nature, and scientists who try to make these claims are outside their field. We're not saying he's a bad physicist. We're not saying he's a bad biologist. What we are saying that he's speaking outside his field. It's imagine if you have a terrific vet. I knew one. There was a dog right at the edge of death. And this vet, he was kind of a naturopath type vet. And he nursed that thing back to life. They were calling the dog the miracle dog. Great vet, right? Now, because he was a great vet, would I bring him in to fix my car if it was broken? No. Might be a great vet, but when it comes to working on cars, he's outside his field. And this is what we find with modern science, physicists, biologists, zoologists, speaking about religion, speaking about philosophy, speaking about metaphysics, and it's actually outside their field. Now, I want to make it very clear because it's a typical claim. Oh, of course you're a Christian. That means you're against science. We've all heard it. You know. No, this is not to denigrate empirical science, but only to recognize the inherent limitations of natural science. Science can explain many things, but it does not explain everything. The natural sciences. In fact, the natural sciences don't even explain or prove the most basic principles that they work on, but that's cause for another talk. And this separation of science and philosophy really is really blossomed. It blew up, say, since the time of Descartes, around the 1700s. There was that little tug of war going on at the time of Aquinas, but it was a small thing with Cigar and Bourbon. But now it's very big, and the superstition is religious truth and philosophical truth is over here, scientific truth is over here. Now, you might have heard of a Professor David Berlinski. He's a secular Jew, and he wrote a book called The Devil's Delusion, Atheism and Its Scientific Pretensions. Berlinski does not really hold to any religious creed, but he is rising up because he is both a philosopher and an accomplished physicist. This man knows the world of natural science. Believe me, he's no piker. Christopher Rara interviewed him. He said he's one of the most brilliant and intimidating men he ever met, just because of the power of his intellect. He wrote this book, and he warns of this danger of atheistic science, and certain, not all, but many modern scientists claim that just through natural science, they have the answer to everything. And he talks about this new logic and where it's going to lead. This is the syllogism, the basic three-part syllogism of logic that he gives to lay out the problem. Of course, it's a false syllogism, but it is how the modern world is operating. Too many in the modern world are operating. Major, if God does not exist, then anything is permitted. Minor, if science is true, then God does not exist. And third, if science is true, then everything is permissible. Okay? The problem is with the middle term. If science is true, then God does not exist. That's a false term. But they give that syllogism in such a way to make you think that it's true. And the thing is, religion is looked upon as the great evil. I was getting my hair cut one time. Oh, what do you do for a living? I edited a paper called Catholic Family News. Catholic? Yes, Catholic. Religion. It's the cause of a lot of wars. The cause of a lot of wars. Now, of course, he didn't get that from himself. That's what the media is telling him. If he went to modern university, it very well could be what the modern university tells him. Religion equals war. So the superstition of today is that religion is supposed to be the cause of all wars. And I'm talking about the true religion. Okay, we know the problem with Muslims. That's something different. But the Catholic religion, Christian religion, is the cause of all wars and mass murder. And if we just have enlightened, godless science, without all this religious superstition, this will lead the way to truth, to life, to world peace, the way, the truth, and the fountain of youth. It's what it'll give you. And this is not just jabbering here. In 2007, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist named Steven Weinberg, he gave an address. Here's what he said. I'm quoting now. Excuse me. Religion is an insult to human dignity. With or without it, you will have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that requires religion. And of course, what do you think? Grand applause. Grand applause. And Dr. Berlinski, okay, now here is a man who does not really profess any religious creed, but he's honest of what he's seeing. Berlinski comments, in speaking thus, Weinberg was warmly applauded, and not one member of his audience asked the question one might have thought pertinent. Just who has imposed on the suffering human race poison gas, barbed wire, high explosives, experiments in eugenics, the formula for Zyklon B, heavy artillery, pseudoscientific justification for mass murder, cluster bombs, attack submarines, napalm, intercontinental ballistic missiles, military space platforms, and nuclear weapons? Who has imposed this, he said? If my memory serves, it wasn't the Vatican. Many of these evils are the product of so-called scientifically enlightened atheistic governments. The 20th century, we're now under the 21st century, of course, but the 20th century is hailed as a scientific century, a paragon of scientific human progress, freeing itself from the superstition of religion so that we have peace and love and brotherhood and graze into the grass. It's a gas, baby, can you dig it? This is the superstition. Yet, what has the 20th century produced? World War I, 15 million dead. World War II, 55 million dead. Hitler's Nazi regime, millions dead. The direct killing of a government against its own citizens. Soviet Union, Stalin's communist regime. From 1924 to 1933 alone, 20 million dead. killing their own people, forced starvation in the Ukraine, Mao Zedong's Communist Party from 1949, 1975, 40 million dead, again, killing their own people. Not to mention Cambodia's Khmer Rouge, 1.6 million dead. Korean War, 2.8 million dead. Rwanda and Burundi, 1.35 million dead. Afghanistan, Congo, Sudan, the list goes on. Millions slaughtered. Unprecedented in history. Progress? If God does not exist, then anything is permissible. All this has happened, Solzhenitsyn says, because man has forgotten God. This is the true glory of complete materialistic, atheistic, secularized society. And I want to make a point here, it's very important, that we just don't believe in God because, gosh, by golly, gosh, because we need people to behave well in order to be, I mean, you hear politicians talk like that. I believe that Christianity is good for this nation. It produces a people that is obedient to the laws, good to their children, friendly to one another. Christianity is good for the nation. Well, it might be good for the nation, but we don't have Christianity for that reason. The first reason that we give homage to God is because God created us out of nothing. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. He sustains us in our existence at every moment. When Adam and Eve fell and the whole human race fell with him, he sent his son to die on the cross, an ignominious death for our redemption. So we are only religion. Religion, as I think you know, is a subsection of the virtue of justice. And justice is defined as giving every man according to his due. And religion, giving our worship to God, our obedience to God, we are only giving God what is due. And our Lord said, love the Lord thy God with thy whole heart. That's the first commandment. That's the point I'm making. And then secondarily, very much, right up next to it though, secondarily, love your neighbor as yourself. So yes, the byproduct of Christianity is you have civilizations and you have a social order where there's not where you don't have mass murder in schools. People going in with machine guns and just killing people, all right? You might have a lunatic do it now and then, but not the way it is happening now. So a lot of this is coming about because science has become atheistic, unnecessarily atheistic. And what is science anyway? Well, science is not just a collection of facts, or it's not just things that we do with a test tube or experiments. No. Going back to what Aristotle would tell us, science is knowledge, scientia, the knowledge that you possess. And Aristotle would tell us that, well, he would say, how do you know when you know something? How do you know when you know something? There's 3 points to it. Number one, you have to know that it is true. You have to know that it is true. Number two, you have to know why it is true. And number three, you have to know why it cannot be otherwise. So you have to know that it is true, you have to know why it's true, and you have to know why it can't be otherwise. So many so-called scientists don't even have true science. Many of them, too, have unproven hypotheses that they present as fact. We'll talk about that a little later. Now, here's the point I want to make now, though. If science, I'm talking about empirical science, is to live up to its name, then it should be objective, okay? It should follow the evidence wherever it takes them, without presupposition. Follow the evidence wherever it goes. The definition of science, according to Dr. Waters, my great teacher of philosophy, it is knowledge through causes. We learn the cause of things. When scientists or botanists, they look at a plant, how is it growing? How is it doing that? What is the cause of all this? Knowledge through causes. So, evidence alone matters in science. Not ideology, but evidence. Is that what we see with many modern scientists? Remember, I'm not saying all scientists. I'm talking those who have fell into this groove here. There's a biologist named Richard Lewontin. He wrote in the New York Times Review of Books, 1997. This is a fascinating admission. He says, and I'm quoting, "Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense," I'll read that again. "Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between the science and supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of the extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism." I'm going to pause there for a minute. When he's saying materialism, he's not using it in the way we often understand it, materialism being that, I get 15 catalogs of J.C. Penney and this and that and the other, and I go through it, order, and I want all this, I want all these material goods. We're not talking about that type of materialism. We're talking about materialism as a belief system that claims that there is nothing else but matter. You are just a gorgeous pile of atoms. That's all you are. Just a beautiful pile of atoms that are just spinning together for a time being, and then it's all going to fall apart again when you die. Okay? There is nothing above nature. It is nothing above the material world. And he's saying we scientists have a commitment to materialism. All right? He goes on. He's a physicist. "It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence," in other words, our presupposition, what we're going into with already fixed in our minds. "We are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produced material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover," he says, "that materialism is an absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." Close quote. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Another physicist talks the same way, Paul Davies. Quote, Science takes as its starting point the assumption that life wasn't made by a God or a supernatural being. And he says scientists do this partly because they don't want to be wrapped in and accused of fundamentalism or any type of thing. But Davies says that many investigators feel uneasy about talking about the origins of life. And he says, behind closed doors, they freely admit that they are baffled. They don't have the answers. UCLA's Professor Burge, he says, quote, materialism is not established or even supported by science, and that its hold over his peers is analogous to that of a political or religious ideology, close quote. This is the state of modern science. Now, I ask you, is this objective inquiry? Is this an open mind following the evidence wherever it leads him? No. This is prejudice. This is bigotry. This is narrow-mindedness. This is not objective science. And you'll notice, too, that the more stuffy people in the world of academia, they will claim that all you stupid little religious people, you're the ones who are prejudiced. You're the ones who are bigoted. You are the ones who are narrow-minded. But we, scientists, we are above all that. We just have the admission from 3 reputable scientists that that is not the case. They have shut it out. One line of inquiry, they will not follow. We will not allow a divine foot in the door. Now again, you always have to make this 15 times when you give a talk like this. We are not saying we are against empirical science. Empirical science is a tremendous good. The advances of empirical science are impressive. I have an iPad, and I love it. I love air conditioning. Anyone listening to this on audio or video, this is brought to you by science. God forbid, if I was rushed to the hospital knowing that I needed open heart surgery here and now, would I be afraid? Yes, I'd be afraid. But also, there'd be a big part of me that would say, I have a good chance, a very good chance of coming through this, of coming through alive and of getting better because of the terrific advances in medical science. Okay, so we're not denigrating science. The way to look at it is, we're just making a distinction, that's all. The way to look at it is, imagine a wife says to her husband, honey, I have to go out this afternoon. Would you mind vacuuming the first floor? Oh, yeah, sure, I'll do it, yeah. So he vacuums the first floor, vacuums the downstairs, and he leaves, when he's done, he leaves the vacuum plump right in the middle of the living room. And the wife comes home and sees it. An hour goes by, 2 hours go by, 3 hours go by. He's sitting in the living room in front of the television watching a John Wayne movie with a beer and a ham and cheese sandwich and a bowl of chips, and that vacuum cleaner is still there. And she comes in and says, honey, that vacuum cleaner doesn't belong there. And in reaction, he grabs the vacuum cleaner, throws it out the window and into the trash can. And she says, why did you do that? And he says, well, you told me to get rid of the vacuum cleaner. Right? This is the type of lunatic accusations that are thrown at the Catholic who is just, I mean, she would say, look, I didn't say you get rid of it. I said, put it in its proper place. That's all I'm asking. And that's what we're talking about with empirical science. Keep it in its proper place. It explains many things. It has done wonders for us. It explains a great deal of things. It does not explain everything, even its own principles, such as the principle of non-contradiction, the principle of sufficient reason, principles of cause and effect. These ultimately are philosophical questions. You don't see them in science or biology. Now, I'm bringing up metaphysics because if you're a Catholic and you went to a Catholic school, especially a Catholic university, and you did not get a course on Thomistic philosophy or Thomistic metaphysics, especially if you went to university, you need to go back to that college and demand a refund. Because Thomistic philosophy, now it sounds highfalutin, it's very simple. In fact, Dr. Edward Feser, one of the best young Thomists who are out today, he says Thomistic philosophy is simply a detailed explanation of what we all know intuitively. It takes what is real and explains it and examines it and demonstrates it. Thomistic philosophy is so important that Pope St. Pius X said that it is the remedy to the heresy of modernism because it's dug deep in reality and not in dreamy notions. He said that we have to admonish professors to bear well in mind that they cannot set aside the principles of St. Thomas Aquinas, especially in metaphysical questions, without grave disadvantage. If you ignore St. Thomas's, the Aristotelian Thomistic metaphysics, you're going to get yourself into trouble. Moreover, in 1910, I'm paraphrasing, Pope St. Pius X said that anyone who is going to get a PhD in canon law or theology, and if he does not, in his formation, get a full Thomistic studies, then his doctorate is to be held as null and void. Talk about invalidity. We have a lot of invalid Catholic theologians out there. Their PhDs are not even valid. Because, especially from the time of the Second Vatican Council, that's calls for another talk, our churchmen have become enamored with modern philosophies and have chucked away St. Thomas Aquinas. One person said he's too narrow, too closed in on himself. Ask me who that person is later. So, What does metaphysics do? Why is it important? Well, when I first asked that question, the answer I got was, metaphysics is the science of being as being. Oh, great, thanks. Being as being, all right. That explains a lot. It explains a lot after you've had a year of philosophy. But when you get that, you have no idea what they're talking about. So I'm going to take you through a little exercise. Kind of fun, really. I'm going to take you through a little exercise so that you understand a little bit what philosophy does and why it's important, why metaphysics is important. The church says that metaphysics is the queen of all the sciences and the handmaiden for theology. Now, if I would tell you that there is a dog in the hallway, what would you know about it? What would you know about it? That it's a dog, right. You don't know if it's a collie, you don't know if it's a dachshund, you don't know if it's one of those teacup, what are they called, teacup chihuahuas, you don't know if it's a Great Dane that you could ride home. You know, you don't know any of that, all right? You just know, you have this concept of dogginess. You have the universal concept, you just don't know the particular that's out there. We'll do something else. So you know something about it. Now, if I say to you, there is something out in the hallway, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. What do you know about it? What do you know about it?
It's a physical object, but that's
pretty close, yeah. You actually know quite a bit about it. You know quite a bit about it. You know 5 things. First of all, that thing in the hallway either is or it isn't. You know that if it is whatever it is. All right? It's a kangaroo if it's a kangaroo. You have no worry about it transmogrifying into an elephant. It is whatever it is. Secondly, you know that the thing cannot both be and not be. Principle of non-contradiction. If it's there, it's there. And if it's not there, it's not there. All right? You know that this thing had a reason for its being. Something caused it to exist. And number 5, you know that if it is not its own cause, then something else had to cause it. Now, you know that not only about that thing in the hallway, you know that about every single thing that exists. These are why they're called transcendental principles. They apply to everything, and they are actually the foundation. So that's why I said about modern scientists not being trained in this and not knowing that these are the suppositions they're working on. These are transcendental principles. And what do you also know about them? They give you absolute certitude. You are absolutely certain. You don't have to question one of these things. And this is why the philosopher will tell you that metaphysics, the hard rock principles of metaphysics, give you absolute certitude. And these points, as I say, do not come from empirical science. It's a different science. It's a different branch of study. You don't come upon them in biology or chemistry or zoology. They use all these principles, whether they want to admit them or not. I know this because Dr. Binet has argued with physicists, and when he brings up these principles, they don't know what to say. When they bring up the metaphysical principles, these scientists, good scientists, they don't know what to say because they have never thought about the foundations on which they're working and the fact that their own field of science doesn't provide them. They have to go to metaphysics for them. It's one of the reasons why I'm saying the empirical sciences don't explain everything. Now, we have a Professor Stephen Hawking out there, and he claims that the universe can be explained without God. But those claims do not intimidate a man who is familiar with the metaphysical principles of Aristotle and Aquinas. His new book, The Grand Design, he says, 2010 it sold 36,000 books just in the first month. He says, spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists. So it's not necessary to invoke God, or really any supreme being, as the source of all creation. So basically what Hawking is saying is that everything you see here, the entire universe and the multiverses that they like to talk about now, came from nothing. That everything comes from nothing. That nothing produced everything. Now, this is something we see nowhere else in the real world. But it is a theory proposed, I think, so that a divine foot does not get in the door. And Professor Burnett, who I'm privileged to study philosophy with him, he just smiles and says, this is what happens when a physicist tries to do metaphysics. He's outside his field. The modern world, who is awash in this type of thing, they prostrate themselves before Hawking's, but every good Thomistic philosopher I know, and every good one that I read, they look at Hawking's as something to be pitied. Because it violates the most basic fundamental principles. Number one, I think this goes back to Parmenides, I think, but Aristotle certainly took it up. From non-being, you get nothing. Being only comes from being. Non-being cannot give you being. You don't get something from nothing. You, my friend here, I'm picking on you today. Do you have $1,000 in your pocket? Nope. Take it out and give it to yourself then. You can't, that's right. Nothing comes from nothing. Rodgers and Hammerstein knew that. The Sound of Music, nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. Yeah, pretty good, boys. You know more than Hawking's. You know more than Hawking. He's saying everything comes from nothing. Now, we know that for every effect, you have to have a cause. This is the type of really basic, fundamental things that we need to get back to, because we're awash in this sentiment and these claims that are said with absolute certitude that are nonsense. G.K. Chesterton once heard an outrageous statement, an outrageously bizarre statement. And he turned to his friend and he said, that statement had to be made by an intellectual. He said, no normal man could be that stupid. Now, we know that every effect has to have a cause. Moms know this. Mom comes in, and her brand new sofa finds an upside down ice cream cone plopped in the middle of the center cushion. She never says, now due to my study of quantum physics, the bizarre, the irregularity that's happening at the subatomic level just kept coming up and up and up, and bam, we have an ice cream cone, and there's no explanation for it. No, Mom says, who did this? Well, the one who did it is up under the bed when they hear hiding under the bed. For every effect, you have to have a cause. There's a wonderful story of an atheist, a well-known atheist, and he went into the bookshop, a bookshop. The bookshop owner recognized him, and the bookshop owner had this beautiful globe on his counter there. And it wasn't like the type of cheesy things that we get at Kmart. I mean, this was a real work of art. And this atheist was admiring it. He said, that's really nicely done. He says, yeah, I think so too. And the atheist said, who made it? And the bookstore owner said, it made itself. It came from nothing. And the atheist said, well, that's a crazy thing to say. And the bookstore owner said, well, that's what you believe. You know, we kind of have to get down to the really basics. Don't be intimidated. Don't be intimidated. You just got to hit them with these common sense things. Now, as I said, Thomistic philosophy is one of the great tragedies, and I could give a whole separate talk on this, of how this solid Thomistic philosophy was, in this first half of the 20th century, many professors were becoming bored with it, and this new theology was coming up that was more in line with modern philosophies, and that was what was exciting. And cliff note, our entire hierarchy right now are servants of this new approach, this new theology. Pretty much, you can't say everybody, but the majority, including the people in Rome. Now, this Thomistic philosophy was dropped, and a kind of a so-called Christian baptizing of modern philosophies have been brought in. And these are modern philosophies that basically say that man is not stable in his being, that everything is in a state of flux, everything is in a state of movement. Well, if man is not stable in his being, then what does that do to morality? That's not stable either. So in the 1920s, it was wrong to have contraception, but today it's okay. In the 1920s, it was wrong to even consider what I'll call Sodom and Gomorrah marriage, but today it's okay. Things change. It is this process movement, modern philosophy, that is at the root of the entire new aggiornamento of the Second Vatican Council, where you have high-ranking officials, church officials, just saying, oh yes, Vatican II is a counter-syllabus. Blessed Pope Pius IX gave us the 1864 syllabus of errors based on the perennial teachings of the centuries. Vatican II comes along and teaches the opposite, and our highest-ranking church people say, well, that's fine. That's fine. This is a new wave of things. This is living tradition. It's a counter-syllabus. Okay? It violates the most basic principle of common sense, which is the principle of non-contradiction. Or we move into another type of philosophy, a philosophy of personalism. Personalism. What it is there's nothing wrong with examining persons and humanity, but is an overemphasis of the personal at the expense of the objective. It becomes very subjective. Vatican II's religious liberty is pretty much based on that. But again, I keep giving you teasers for other presentations. But anyway, highly important that we return to the common sense principles of St. Thomas. You probably know that St. Thomas Aquinas also has his famous 5 ways of proving the existence of God. I'm going to give them to you in about 3 minutes, because you either have to take an entire course or get it in 3 minutes. Because you have to remember, too, when the student will study the 5 ways, they have already had an entire course of metaphysics. They've already done the studies. They're already thinking logically. They're thinking according to the principles of Aristotle. So when they get the 5 ways, they can apply them right away. When you give them to a modern audience, they're not used to thinking in these terms, and so it still baffles them. I'm going to take you through it very quickly because there's a point about God's creation that I want to really get to. But the 5 ways, okay, the 5 ways. Basically, St. Thomas points out that we observe that everything is in motion. Everything is in motion, and anything that undergoes movement is moved by another. And when you have this movement, you can't have it going back to infinite regress, one thing. Otherwise, you have just this freight train going with no engine pulling it or no engine pushing it. It's just going. And that's contrary to reason, contrary to common sense. There has to be a first mover who is himself unmoved. That's what we call God. Second way, that there is a supreme cause behind everything. For every effect, there has to have a cause. And you can't go back that way in infinite regress. There has to be an ultimate cause who is caused by no other. The third is that this is a necessary being. In other words, he must exist. We don't have to exist. He brought us into existence. Okay, our Lord said, I'm jumping into theology here, our Lord said, I am who am. Fourth, that this first being is an infinite being and the foundation and cause of every perfection in all limited beings. We see beauty. Where does it come from? It comes from the supreme being who has it in its perfection. We see goodness. Where does it come from? It comes from the supreme being. So he is the source and the perfection of every good thing. And finally, that this first being is also intelligent. He produces creatures, even inanimate creatures, like the moon circling the sun, the moon circling the earth, excuse me, that operates according to fixed laws. It's the product of a design. And he governs the nature, and he governs everything that he creates. So, 5 ways very quickly. You can study that on your own as in the future sometime. But anyway, I want to get to something else that we learned from reason. We are going to get to Our Lady of Fatima, too, towards the end. But we say that we believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. And we're going to see that actually we can come to the conclusion that this great being who produced everything from nothing is almighty, And we can learn that without even consulting Scripture. Reason can take us to it. Okay, this is the type of thing that St. Thomas does for us. The fact that to create from nothing requires limitless power, requires infinite power, and I'm taking this from Dr. Dennis Bennett, a terrific article he wrote on the subject called How Creation Implies God. This is a condensation of it. If you want a copy, talk to me and I can get it to you. So, what does it mean to bring something into creation? What does it mean to bring something into existence from nothing? We're not talking about from pre-existing matter, going to Home Depot and getting all the pieces you need for your deck. We're not talking about a Lego set that you put together. Bringing something into existence from nothing. Now, to help us understand this, St. Thomas gives a principle. It may not make sense to you, but we're going to give you the explanation afterwards. St. Thomas says, a greater power is required in the agent insofar as the potency is remote from the act. You need a greater power. The farther you have to go to achieve your goal, as it were, the greater power you need. It's kind of like, a 10-year-old boy might be able to run 2 blocks and then he'll be exhausted. But a marathon runner could run 20 miles. He has a greater power because from potency, from the potential to the actuality, it requires more power. All right, I'm going to explain this a little more, again from Dr. Bennett. Suppose you want to make a chicken. I'm not talking about cooking one for dinner. You want to make a chicken. Well, to make a chicken from a pre-existing chicken, it does require a certain amount of power because the chicken, one chicken is the cause, and the other chicken will be the effect. And they're not so remote from one another, they are alike. So it does require power, but a certain amount. Now, suppose you were going to go to the next step. This is all hypothetical, of course, but you get the idea. You're going to go to the next step. You want to make a chicken from vegetative life. You want to make a chicken from your cabbage patch. All right. What would that require? Well, it would require a greater amount of power because of the remoteness between the beginning and the end. To take vegetative life and take it to sensate life. Now, vegetative life, as you all know, it has immanent life. It has nutrition. It feeds itself. Growth, thank you. Nutrition, growth, it grows, and generation, it reproduces. Cabbages make more cabbages. Dandelions make more dandelions. We all know that. So vegetative life has this, and it's coming from the inside. Okay? Sensate life, the chicken, yes, same thing. It has nutrition, feeds itself, it grows, and it reproduces. But it also has the 5 external senses, seeing, hearing, touching, taste, and smell, and the 4 internal senses of imagination and memory and all that type of thing. So it's a higher form of life, and it also has self-motion. So you're going from a lower form of life to a higher form of life. You would need a greater amount of power to do that. Third, suppose then you want to make a chicken from mud, from the slime of the earth. Then you are going from an even lower form. You're not even dealing with life at this point. You're just dealing with matter, and you want to create a chicken from that. That would require an even greater amount of power. Okay? So, run through it again. You have chicken from chicken, a certain amount of power. Chicken from vegetative life, a greater amount of power. Chicken from mud, an even greater amount of power it would be required. So then, based on that, how much power does it require to make a chicken from nothing? From no pre-existing matter whatsoever. It requires an infinite amount of power. Because it's not that there is a greater relation between chicken and non-being. The fact is that there is no relation between chicken and non. We can't even imagine non-being because we think in terms of images. Okay? But There is no relation between a live chicken and non-being. It is a relation that can't be measured. It's a relation that has no limits. And because it is measureless and limitless, then to create from nothing requires a power that is measureless, a power that is limitless, a power that is infinite and almighty power. And we are finite, and you can't give what you do not have. You have to have an infinite being do an infinite act, an act of infinite power. And this is one of the reasons why we say, I believe in God the Father Almighty. As you notice, as I said earlier, I didn't quote the Bible. This is just the hard rock reasoning of the metaphysics of Aristotle and Aquinas that will bring you to these conclusions. And I remember too, good old Father Marian, an old traditionalist priest I knew. He would argue with atheists, and he would say, look, all I want you to do, before I listen to you, all I want you to do is I want you to make a single blade of grass from nothing. I'm not asking for a handful of sand. I'm not asking for a bowl of chili. I'm not asking for Mount Everest from nothing. All I want, show me or tell me how you can recreate one blade of grass from nothing. You can't. It requires an infinite power. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, and this is the reason, Wisdom chapter 11, thy almighty hand which has made the world. It is in Scripture, but I didn't start with Scripture. Now, one other thing about science that we have to keep in mind. The distinction that exists between empirical science, that is science by observation, and science that is done by speculation. Theories the scientists come up with that may or may not be true. And depending upon how forceful the scientist is, the trend today is to promote the theory, the speculative science, the speculation, as if it comes from observation. We definitely see this in the world of evolution. In the United States, 1930s, a paleontologist found a tooth in Nebraska. Some of you might know about this. Found a tooth in Nebraska. Held it up to the scientific world, said, I found the missing link between man and ape based on the shape of this tooth. I've never seen anything like it. So what does he do? He publishes. The London Illustrated News gets hold of it. They give you this entire fictitious story of the life of it was called Nebraska Man. The life of Nebraska Man, the type of food he ate, the type of hunting he did. There's this artistic interpretation of Nebraska Man there with this equally hideous wife on this primeval landscape, and basically telling us, not presenting it as speculation, telling us we have found the missing link. Well, they did a little more. Somebody thought to do a little more investigation, and it turned out that that tooth was the tooth of a peccary. Peccary is a pig. Our own Nebraska Man was a pig. Same thing with Piltdown Man. It was a fraud. It lasted 40 years, and it was even of a missing link, and it was a clumsy forgery. When they finally really examined it, they found chemicals that stain the jaw. They found that things were forced together. 40 years, and the scientific establishment never apologized for this fraud. And then there's the funny business of Pluto. Remember Pluto? Used to be a planet. Okay, used to be a planet. That's what I was taught. Ninth planet. Well, that was a good bit of speculation. Okay, fine. Good speculation. It was presented as fact, though, when I was young. Wasn't presented as speculation. Now that our telescopes have gotten better, now that we can send probes out there, now they're saying that Pluto is not really a planet. It's part of something called the Kuiper belt, something like that. It's a region that extends beyond Neptune, 55 astronomical units. An astronomical unit is the length of the Earth to the Sun. That's one astronomical unit. And this is 55 times that. Okay? So A lot of it is speculation that is presented as observation. Don't fall for it. Don't be intimidated in the face of this godless science. Catholics need to rise up and provide answers. Again, I have to say it again, we are not against science. We just want to show the inherent limitations of natural science, that it does not answer anything, and the natural science cannot be invoked to disprove God and disprove the Catholic religions. Because godless science leads to institutionalized godlessness, which leads to tyranny. Solzhenitsyn said it. All this has happened because man has forgotten God. And in this atheistic environment that we have now, and I am coming to the close, in this atheistic environment that we have now, we have the rise of a new tyranny, a new form of godlessness, under the cover of political correctness, media barrages, and the de-education and deformation of millions of young people in colleges and universities. I know this is a delicate topic, but I do think we have to face the reality. The new source of persecution for Christians is going to be the so-called Sodom and Gomorrah marriages and all the ramifications that go with it. You talk about bullying, you haven't seen anything yet. My father played weddings. He played weddings for a living. One of the dearest men in the world, my father. But if he was living in New York now, and a couple asked him to play their SS wedding, he would refuse on the grounds of conscience. He could be sued, he could be fined, he could be dragged him through in front of a human rights tribunal. My parents' lives made a misery, and in the eyes of many, including the present state of modern universities, my dear father would be just another old bigot who's getting exactly what haters deserve. Sock it to him. When it was legalized in New York, there were 3 New York clerks who said, we can't cooperate in this. Andrew Cuomo, a so-called Catholic, he said, then resign. If you can't do the job, then resign. The Catholic couple you might know in Vermont, they didn't want to rent a room to one of these couples. They were sued. They had to pay $30,000 fine. Another group in upstate New York, Robert and Cynthia Giffords, they didn't want to rent their Liberty Ridge for one of these things. They have children at home. They didn't want to do it. They were hit with discrimination lawsuits. There's a lawsuit right now going on in a restaurant in New York. There is a florist in Washington State. She has an odd name, Baronelle Stutzman. She's been there for 47 years. And this man came in wanting flowers for his wedding. And it wasn't a normal wedding, okay? And she said, I just can't cooperate in that. She was hit with a lawsuit. The ACLU jumps into it, tell her that she has to publicly promise, this is going on right now, had to publicly promise to change her ways and to give $5,000 to a local youth organization that supports Sodom and Gomorrah teenage sports activities. The good side of this, though, this story, is that her business is booming because the local people are fed up and they're outraged that this woman who has been there for 47 years is now being hit with a lawsuit for something like this. But the way the laws are written, the Catholic has no conscience protection in the face of this bullying. Catholics in the United States, I think you know that, we are forced, the Catholic institutions are forced to provide contraception and sterilization under Obamacare. If they don't, they will be hit with ruinous fines and literally driven out of business. Contraception, abortion, all of this are all enterprises of the Antichrist godlessness that was all called for in the Humanist Manifesto, 1933 and 1974. And do not look to the media to come to your defense. Do not look to the media. I'll quote Richard Burke, an openly Sodom and Gomorrah editor of the New York Times. He stated in a speech, I apologize for this title, to the National Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association, a remarkably powerful organization. He said, literally, 3/4 of the people deciding what's on the front page of the New York Times are not so closeted homosexuals. Those are the ones deciding what you get for news. And this group, this National Lesbian, Gay, and Journalists Association, they're a powerful organization. Nobody talks about them because they frame how the Sodom and Gomorrah issue is given by means of the media. Always sympathetic, always encouraging, and anyone who opposes them are full of hate and bullying. That's who's running the media at the moment. So, all this has happened, Solzhenitsyn, because man has forgotten God. Dostoevsky, if there is no God, then anything is permissible. Solzhenitsyn again, it is godlessness that leads to the gulag. This is the reality of where we are. And Our Lady of Fatima gave the remedy almost 100 years ago. She gave us the remedy before we even knew what the problems were going to be. Fatima is a reaffirmation of all the truths of the Catholic faith. Reaffirmed these truths: prayer, sacrifice, devotion to Our Lady, the reality of heaven, the reality of purgatory, the reality of hell. Confession, part of the 5 First Saturdays, the real presence of our Lord in the Eucharist, body, blood, soul, and divinity. That's part of the prayer that the angel taught. The authority of the papacy. And Our Lady gave proof. The miracle of the sun, witnessed by 70,000 people. Our Lady did not say to these 3 children, look, here's what I'm telling you, and if people don't believe you, then they're a bunch of bigots. She didn't say that. No. She said in July, she said, October, I'll perform a miracle so that all will believe. In August, she said, in October, I'll perform a miracle so that all will believe. In September, in October, she said, I will perform a miracle so that all will believe. And the miracle took place October 13th, 1917, as scheduled, witnessed by 70,000 people. And it was even reported, I think you all know this, by the liberal anti-clerical press. Here's what was written in an anti-clerical newspaper by an anti-clerical journalist. I mean, imagine Chris Matthews writing this. It's just, beyond belief. But he said, we saw the huge crowd turn towards the sun, which appeared at its zenith, clear of the clouds. It resembled a flat plate of silver, and it was possible to stare at it all without the least discomfort. It did not burn the eyes. It did not blind. We would say that it produced an eclipse. Then a tremendous cry rang out, and the crowd nearest us were heard to shout, miracle, miracle, marvel, marvel, before the dazed eyes of the people whose attitude transported us to biblical times and who, dumbfounded, heads uncovered, contemplated the blue of the sky. The sun trembled. It made strange and abrupt movements outside of all cosmic laws. The sun danced, according to the typical expression of the peasants. Close quote. She performed a miracle for all to see, so that they would first of all believe that she appeared, and secondly, accept her words. Now notice something about this miracle. She was not theorizing. It was not speculation. It was observation. Thousands saw it. And Our Lady was trying to save us from the gulag. Russia will spread her errors. She was trying to save us from the errors of godlessness that lead to the gulag. The good will be martyred, she said. And she called for the consecration of Russia, which has not yet been done. But she promised, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia. Russia will convert to the Catholic faith. That's what conversion means. And a period of peace granted to the world. Our Lady is the conqueror of all heresies. She's the woman of Genesis who will crush the head of the serpent. And one of the effects of this triumph, I believe, will be a return of the world to true and honest science that no longer starts with godless presuppositions. It will be a science that allows a divine foot in the door. So we can be assured that a defining mark of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary will be her crushing the head of today's domination of godlessness. Thank you for your attention.
I have come to warn the faithful to amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. They must not continue to offend our Lord, who is already deeply offended. In the final vision on October 13, 1917, Our Lady silently held out the scapular, a gesture which indicates that she wants everyone to wear it. Our Lady said, "If my requests are not heeded, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, raising up wars and persecutions against the Church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer, and various nations will be annihilated." Pray a great deal and make sacrifices for sinners, for many souls go to hell because they have no one to make sacrifices and pray for them.
Good morning, Holy Father. Yesterday, when I sat in St. Peter's Square, you looked so small. And I was thinking, you've got the greatest responsibility in the world. Because you, and only you, can do what Our Lady asked. You can instruct the bishops, and you only can consecrate Russia to her Immaculate Heart. Not only does your eternal salvation depend on this, but ours too. I bring you greetings from the people of Ireland. I have family in New Zealand, in America, in South Africa. We all depend on you. Not only that, we depend, and this is my request to you, on the true Mass being restored to us, as opposed to the terrible things that pass for the Mass now. I can only speak not from personal appearance at such Masses, because I do not go to them. I can speak about what I've seen on the Irish television, where they have dancing girls, they have women in immodest dress up in the sanctuary. All those things need correction, and only you can do it. We need a true father to be our Pope. I'm 83, you're 2 years older than me, and you and I both know we're on the last leg of our journey. You may have longer than me, I may have longer than you, but with whatever time you've got, please don't risk any more damage to the Church than has already begun. We have to, for the sake of future generations, bring things back to what the Church was, what has been passed down to us from the beginning. That is what we need. The Mass is the old Mass, as I call it, is the Mass of all times. And Pope St. Pius V, in his decree, quote, primum, stated so clearly, nobody has the right to change this. they've changed it. We need to go back right to before the council. We need, in the schools, we need the true faith to be taught to the children. They're not taught that now. They've got books that are like social behaviour. They learn about the Buddhists and the Hindus and everything else except their catechism. Even in Ireland they call them religion teachers. Even the teachers don't know the faith. This is what we need. Who else can bring that into force but you? A lot of bishops apparently don't take too much notice of what you say, but you have the force, you have the power to bring these things back to us before it's too late. We have Our Lady's promise that if you consecrate Russia, Russia will be converted, and what a huge difference that will make to the world. And we have her promise that after that there will be an era of peace. There is no other way. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for accepting to be the Pope. And please, just go back and put things right for all of us. Thank you, Holy Father.
Our Lady makes miracles happen all the time, and the Pope, I think if it's up to Our Lady, he's going to view this DVD and see what we have to say and see the trouble we're in. Governments, social societies, and sadly even many parish priests and diocesan bishops, even some Vatican officials, are not responding seriously and properly to these diabolical threats to our lives and souls that we face today. Holy Father, your flock is desperate, vulnerable, and confused amidst the catastrophic dangers their lives and souls are in. We are deeply concerned for the future of our children, and most important, for the welfare of their souls. The whole world is despondent and unified in one anguished cry. What hope have we? Holy Father, you hold that hope. That solution is in the palm of your hand. Only you can save your flock and the world. And that is by obedience to the holy request of the Mother of God herself, Our Lady of Fatima, who said of herself, "Only I can help you." All she asks is for you, Holy Father, together with all the Catholic bishops of the world, at the same time to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. A mere 5-minute prayer. Holy Father, you need not worry about any repercussions or threats that we all hear about today are being hurled at him. Have confidence, Holy Father. Have confidence in Our Lady's promise. Heaven does not make mistakes. God created the miracle of the Son and fulfilled prophecies made at Fatima for you, Holy Father, so you would believe and do as Our Lady of Fatima requests. Trust in the loving guidance that Our Lady of Fatima gives you. Trust in her maternal promise of protection, as you yourself have nurtured your flock to do. Our Lady requested the consecration of Russia, not the world. She was specific, and Our Lady does not mince words. Please, Holy Father, take Our Lady's words seriously and literally. We cannot change a formula prepared in heaven by God himself, which he sent you through his Holy Mother. Holy Father, when you baptize a baby called John Paul, you don't say, "I baptize all the babies in the world." It would not be valid. Holy Father, when you consecrate a new church, Our Lady of Fatima Church, you don't just say, I consecrate the churches in the world. It would not be valid. Without mentioning John Paul by name, you would not have effected that baptismal consecration. You would not have set aside that specific baby, John Paul, for God. Without mentioning Our Lady of Fatima Cathedral by name, you would not have effected that consecration. You would not have set aside that specific cathedral for God. Neither, and I must emphasize this, neither can you effect the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary if you do not mention Russia by name. Consecrating all the countries in the world, again, does not set aside Russia for God. The consecration would be invalid, and it does not and it will not have the promised effect. Holy Father, you better than I know this. You are our shepherd. We look to you for guidance and protection against the diabolical forces that prey after our souls on a daily basis. And so we are confused as to why you have not done the consecration of Russia according to the formula Our Lady requested and which God Himself commanded. Holy Father, time has run out. Our Lady offered us the only solution, but only through you. Every day of delay in making this consecration, many, many more souls and lives are lost. Today, even thousands upon thousands of souls are already being persecuted, tortured, imprisoned, murdered for their faith. Please do not delay any longer. Please protect your flock. Please consecrate Russia now before it is too late for us. And even for yourself, as the vision of the third secret foretells. Holy Father, we pray for you daily. Save us, save our children. Save yourself from the horrible chastisements prophesied by Jesus and Mary if you do not hasten to fulfill Our Lady of Fatima's request now. Holy Father, now is the time to show Our Lady of Fatima your trust in her and your obedience to her command.
I have come to warn the faithful to amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. They must not continue to offend our Lord, who is already deeply offended. In the final vision on October 13, 1917, Our Lady silently held out the scapular, a gesture which indicates that she wants everyone to wear it. In the final vision on October 13, 1917, Our Lady silently held out the scapular, a gesture which indicates that she wants everyone to wear it. Pray a great deal and make sacrifices for sinners, for many souls go to hell because they have no one to make sacrifices and pray for them. Our Lady said to Sister Lucia of Fatima, I promise to assist at the hour of death with all the graces necessary for salvation. All those who on the first Saturday of 5 consecutive months go to confession, receive Holy Communion, recite 5 decades of the Rosary, and keep me company for 15 minutes while meditating on the mysteries of the Rosary, with the intention of making reparation to me. Pray the Rosary every day to obtain peace for the world.